Well, hold it. That's a good question, Roger. Hang on.
Up in your right corner, you've got a little three periods up there. Click that and you can see whether to start your video or not. Should be up upper right.
Well, I see.
You have
you. Okay.
Yeah.
See me now? No.
Oh,
I'll be doggone.
maybe your camera's not working.
Well, it should be. Hang on. Try one other thing. I don't know why that's not.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And when you get
Okay.
let's see if you can get it to work. If you put your cursor up over the right-hand corner, you see those three dots?
Yeah.
It should say,
I mean, it's showing a block for me, but it's not showing any. I don't have a picture. Let me check this.
about the bottom left on the whole screen.
Yeah, it says the only thing down on the bottom left says stop video.
Well, something's going on with your camera, I guess. We'll go ahead and get started. We don't have to see you to hear you.
Okay.
It'd be better, but we'll do what we can. Brother Solomon, we got down through ready to start talking about an elder's children on page 5.
Yes,
But I wanted to reiterate something that is not in the lesson text itself. There are people today who are saying that women can be elders. And of course, the text is very clear in Titus 3. If a man desires the office of a bishop, he desires a good work. And also, we have a man who's a husband of one wife. And then I was reading something recently about an elder's children. And, you're going to get different answers from different people depending on a person's hermeneutic. That is how they interpret scripture. But if Titus 1 and verse 6, for example, says that having children that believe, it's not in opposition to say, well, if you don't have any children, it doesn't matter whether they believe. I am convinced that the text is teaching that an elder must have children and they must be old enough to be believers, at least. These are requirements. And of course, it's when you think about a man and his home, the way he conducts himself in the home, the way he interacts with his wife, and the way he interacts with his children, and whether he's teaching them or not, it's just a given that a man is married, he's the husband of one wife, and he has children who are old enough to believe, and he has some children that believe. Now, let's talk about the text itself. If you look at, for example, there at the top of page 4. Yeah, right there, page 5. I'm sorry. The way he disciplines his children, and sometimes we use the word discipline, and we're talking about punishment, but discipline means training. And so the way he trains his children and the way they respond to their father shows whether they respect him or not, and whether they are willing to listen to their father, and the way that he treats them. What we're looking at in an elder with his wife and his children, you're looking at a family. And the question is, what do you see in this family? How do the husband and wife interact with one another? And how does this father and the mother too, how do they interact with their children? And how do the children respond? And we look at some of these points here that we're we're amply justified in saying that those old enough to be Christians ought to be. Now, I want to say that there's no age number for when a child should become a Christian, but surely by the time they're 14 or 15 years of age, they should be Christians unless they have some kind of handicap, which you would never expect certain people with certain mental handicaps to be expected to obey the gospel. But if they're normal, they should be old enough to be Christians. Now, if a father is not able to bring his children to Christ, how can he bring other people? The home is the easiest place to do that training. I mean, they're your children. Even if you adopted them, they're yours. And I know sometimes, just kind of thinking this out loud, that I've known people who have adopted children, and somebody asked the question, well, are they his children? Well, of course they're his children. And you have to look at the entire circumstances as to what age they might have been when they were adopted. And you have to look at all those aspects. But the point is, he has children that are old enough to be Christians, and they ought to be. And does that mean all of his children have to be Christians? Well, let's think about this. Let's say a man has 6 children, for example, or maybe he only has 4. And maybe he had 2 early on, and then later he and his wife had some more, and maybe there's a large age gap. But the 2 older ones who are old enough to be Christians are Christians, and then they have one who's maybe still too young. I don't believe that disqualifies him if he has his older children that are accountable for their actions are Christians. There are so many factors in this, and I want to encourage anyone who's listening online or you students, you're going to have to dig deeper into this than we're able to cover in a brief period of time in these classes. But now, it's interesting about Titus chapter 1 and verse 6. And we've got the scriptures here for having one child. And I'm just going to let you all as students study that. But let me just ask you this. If you ask me, say, well, Brother Roger, do you have children? And if let's just say I only had one. So yes, we have a son. Well, I wouldn't correct that by saying, well, I only have one child, I don't have children. We understand that children can mean one or several. But the critical thing is, and Mike will probably want to get involved in this discussion, but in Titus 1 and verse 6, we have children that believe. And Wayne Jackson, in his comments on this, said that is unique only to Paul's letter to Titus. And there's a diversity of opinion as to what that may require. And there are people other than Brother Wayne and others have looked at this and say, well, they're faithful to their parents. But when you typically talk about a young person who believes, you're not talking about whether they listen to their parents or not. You're thinking about whether they believe in God and are believers and are Christians, not necessarily faithful to their parents. But so my understanding after looking at all of these different aspects of it, when Titus says children who believe, he's talking about children old enough to be Christians, and they are Christians. And it's interesting, and we'll have another note on this on another page, but the word having there is in the present tense, which means that at the time that a man is looked at to be considered as an elder, at that time he has children who believe. He doesn't have children who grew up and fell away, because then you wouldn't say that he has children who believe. he has children who are faithful
See the
or
clock.
faithful Christians.
Hold it.
And so we have,
Sir,
then we look,
We got class going right now.
I have a question, sir.
all right.
Yes, sir. So
Okay, so
it is that it is what we are seeing is that
where it says,
someone cannot be elder if he doesn't have at least one child who is a Christian.
Right. He has to have children. And he has to have at least
I'm
one
looking for-
child that's a
all right.
Christian.
are you talking to the-
Okay.
Microphone.
Hey, Roger. Roger.
Yes. Yes,
Hang on just a second. I'm trying to get my screen up real quick.
Okay.
I got Kevin on. I'm trying to get my screen up real quick and I'll get with you. One sec.
Can you mute your mic right quick?
I can.
Okay, so let me ask your question again, Brother Solon.
Yes, sir. Oh, so you mean re-ask it? Ask the question again?
Yes, please ask it again. I want to be clear so I can answer.
Okay, sir. I was asking if what we are seeing is that someone cannot be an elder if he doesn't have at least one child who is a Christian.
That's right. That's what the Bible says. And I want you to think about it in a broad picture here. When you look at an elder, another word, as we looked at the earlier points in this lesson, he's also a shepherd. He's a shepherd over God's people. And there's no training ground for that like the home. You've brought these children up from the time they were born, or maybe if you adopted them, they were 2 years old or something. You've learned how to work with children, to teach them and guide them as I'm using the word shepherd loosely here, but as the head of a home. And so then you move that to the church and the heavy obligation that an elder has to shepherd the people of God. And raising children is the best training ground there is for that. Learning how, and you're with them all the time.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's say that he has a small children. They're not old enough to be Christians. Well, he could be a deacon. He could be a deacon, but the deacon's requirements are not as strict as for an elder. And so the elder must have children who are old enough to believe. Then you have, but you look at their conduct too. You can have parents who will bring their children to church, Sunday school, but the way those children behave is a whole different matter. They could have been baptized, but the way they behave, it's kind of a gauge, as to how well he does in training them. And I've seen parents who will just let their children do whatever they want to do, and they don't watch them. And I think, well, if they're not going to watch their own children, they're certainly not going to watch God's people. So you look at how well does a man manage his children. And here's another thing, I want to teach you a little something about interpretation. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, when you see, first of all, that in verse 4, talking about the requirements of an elder, he must be one who manages his own household well. And I think that could have something to do with the way he handles his money and things like that. But the clarification is, or the qualification here is, keeping his children under control with all dignity. That is, he knows how to work with his children instead of, just being real harsh and hard, and you're going to do this or I'll do this, sometimes you have to do that, but does he guide them? And Paul says, if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? And so, and then you've got children who are not unruly. They're not accused of riot, which tells us, I want you to think about it. You've got dissipation or debauchery. A 7-year-old child's not going to be doing that. You're talking about an older child that's old enough to get out and around the wrong kind of people and start drinking and doing other things that are immoral and ungodly. So that also tells us something about the age of the elders' children. You're not going to have 7 and 8-year-olds doing those things, but so they're old enough to understand and be subject to his rules. 1 Timothy 1 and verse 9. That's if you look at that, it's not exactly dealing with the children, but he's talking about people who are lawless and rebellious and ungodly, that's what the law is for. Well, you can make the application. How are this man's children? How are they in the community? Do they have trouble in the school system or in the neighborhood? You know, how do they get along with the other children in the church? That's a sign of how they're brought up. The next one I wanted to look at is there's a question that comes up sometimes about what about when an elder has children and they are, say, old enough to be on their own. They've moved out, they're on their own, they form their own homes. You will get a variety of answers to that question from good Bible students, people who really want to do what's right. And what some brethren will say is that, well, you know, once a child moves out of the house and they're on their own, they form their own homes, they're not really part of your home anymore. In a very strict sense, that's true. But in another sense, if a man has children and they become adults, and let's say he has 4 children, and 2 of them they've moved out, they formed their own homes, and they're strong Christians. But then he may have 2 more that they're just not faithful. We recognize that young adults have free will. They can choose what they're going to do. But in that situation, would you answer the question, does he have faithful children? Yes, he has 2. But let's say that none of his children are faithful, but they're all adults. And they've moved out on their own, and maybe they got married, maybe they didn't, but they're just not faithful. And some of our brethren will say, well, you know, once they move out, they're no longer under his control. We have an interesting point, however, in Titus chapter 1 and verse 6. And this is where you'll run into some discussion with people that can be a bit challenging. It says, having children who believe. And there are those who want to put children in the category of being young and at home. Well, let me ask this question. If let's say a father and his wife, they have 1 or 2 children, and they have a 19-year-old son, and he's the oldest. He's still subject to the father's rule, but a 19-year-old is not a child. He's a young adult. In our country, he's old enough to go to war, or at least, you know, and so, and then let's say he's still living at home. If he's 20, he's not a child. And so I don't think we can kind of make the decision based on whose roof they're under, but their behavior. And I want you to think about this. I know you're going to get some rebuttal from some people on it as far as, well, when they move out, you're not responsible for them, and that doesn't keep you from becoming an elder. And I hear some really what I believe to be faithful brethren say that, but think about it like this. What is the proof of a man's ability to raise faithful children? Typically, What do you see when they grow up? And that's an important question to ask. You know, it's not whether or not a parent can do a good job and children become unfaithful, but we're talking about a man who's going to be an elder, a shepherd over God's people. And it's a very important question. And if you look here at, let's see, on page 7, near the bottom of the page, I made a note here that says the word having in Titus 1:6, the word in Greek is echo, which translated can mean to have, to hold, to keep, or to be. So you got the parsing of it. It's a present active, it's a verb, and it's a present active participle, which means it's in the present tense. An elder must have faithful children at the time he is considered for the eldership. I know there are congregations that say, well, I know, let's say that their last name was, say, Smith, or, you know, you got different names in Jamaica, but we got a lot of Smiths in the United States. And you know how they were bringing their children up. They had those children in Sunday school. They had them in worship. You never saw any conflict in the family between the parents and all this. And then later on, they grew up and they became unfaithful. I would be uncomfortable recommending a man for the eldership if he could not produce faithful adult children. Now, if some of them were faithful and some weren't, that's different. And I know that people see this a little differently. I still lean strongly toward the idea that, well, if I can't raise my children to be faithful adults, how can I shepherd God's people? And I think that's a fair question. You know, and it comes back to defining children. And somebody could say, Brother Roger, do you have children? Yes, I have 4. How many of them are at home? None. They're all on their own. And so I still have children. Did you have a comment or question?
Yes, sir. I was going to say that I believe that if you have children and then maybe you were an elder already while raising up these children before leaving your house, they were faithful. Now, when they are on their own, they became unfaithful, they are not behaving properly and so on. Then it means that the father in question or the elder in question would need to get out of duty. And the reason why I'm saying that, and you will tell me if you agree or not, is because as soon as the children backslide from the faith or drift away from the faith, then it is going to affect the reputation of the elder. For it says in the Bible that an elder must be blameless, which means without having a bad reputation, without reproach. So that's the reason why I believe if the children now decide to leave, after they leave your house, they are not behaving faithfully, then it is going to affect the work of the elder or the effectiveness of the elder.
It raises a question. It sure does.
Yes.
If I were in a congregation, and let's say I were not an elder, maybe I'm the preacher, and one of the elders' children, after they become grown, they become unfaithful, and he decides that he doesn't want to resign and the other elders don't ask him to, I'm not going to raise serious outrage to that. I would probably talk about it, but I'm not going to make a serious situation out of it, but I'm always going to question it. Here's the thing. I want to say this before we move on over to the next few points, that you know, and I know whether or not a man is a good preacher based on listening to his sermons. You can tell whether he has studied or not. You can tell whether he threw a sermon together or he keeps preaching the same thing over and over and over, and then you know he's not studying. And if he's not interested in trying to reach lost people, the fruit is there. So a question comes up. Let's say that a man is an elder and his children are faithful while they're home, or at least they're going to church, and then they become unfaithful later. How does he do in trying to shepherd God's people? How did he do with trying to restore his own children? Did he make the effort? Did he try to get other people involved to restore his own children? Does he work as a shepherd of God's people, trying to help God's people be faithful? Or does he just kind of look after the money and that's all he does? Those are serious things to look at because there's more to it than just whether or not, if a man's children are unfaithful, there are other things to look at. And there's so many aspects here. You take, for example, in the previous verse of one who knows how to manage his own household. He has learned how to raise Christian people. And in all likelihood, because he has to be able to teach, he's been a teacher in the home, he's been a teacher in the church. And so all of these things, Brother Solomon, go together. It's not just one thing that's standing alone.
Yes.
So I would encourage all the students to look seriously at this and, look real hard. And one day you may be facing a situation and you're looking at appointing elders. And you have to look at all of these qualifications. It's not just one or two. But I do know that in our country, the most controversial point is the one we're talking about now. But it shouldn't be. The Bible says what it says about it. Look here, there's a man that we cited here at the bottom of page 7 by the name of Kelly. He was not a member of the church, but he's talking about the elders. He says their children too provide a useful test for their suitability. A test. They should be believers, sharing their father's faith in Christ, and in their daily conduct, they should not be chargeable with loose living. The cognate verb you see in Luke 15:13, talking about the prodigal son's riotous living. They shouldn't be insubordinate. For the latter quality, in 1 Timothy 3:4, a man who cannot bring up his children to be well behaved must lack the combination of sympathy and firmness called for in an elder. And a part of that behavior is faithfulness. Now, I want to say this. A lot of parents do the best they know to do in raising their children. At least they think they do. And sometimes their children become unfaithful. But that's a lot of Christian people. And so that being the case, that's one thing. But a man being appointed as an elder is a different discussion altogether. I see Mike's microphone is unmuted. I want to see if you want to add anything to this, Mike, because we talked a lot here.
Well, I apologize for the problems. I don't know if I had an update or something while I was gone and it kicked the camera off. Kevin's coming by later and he'll take a look at it. I apologize for the problems. But anyway, I agree with what Brother Roger said. And I think, as Roger mentioned a moment ago, when it comes to the qualifications for serving as an elder or a deacon, you've got to look at the sum totality of all of those qualifications. And I think that where the church has gotten in trouble in the past, and Roger and I, we've talked about it quite a bit, but I think where we've really gotten in trouble is that we have not been true to holding men to some of those qualifications. And as a result, we have a, for lack of a better way to say it, a substandard product in the eldership. We got men that really don't meet those qualifications. And what Roger was saying about having faithful children, I just don't see how you get around that. I think a man has to have, you have to have faithful children. And I know Roger talked about, if you've got 5 children and, you know, three of them are Christians and 2 have not yet reached that age of accountability, I think it'd still be qualified. But again, I think we need to really look at those qualifications closely.
All right. Let's go on now to talk about an elder being temperate. Now, this material, we had it right there where it needed to be, right there. This material came from a brother who was citing the Old American Standard Translation, and I left it. So he would use the older English words. The word temperate, and in some translations in 2 Peter chapter 1, where Peter talks about, add your faith, godliness, add faith, knowledge, self-control. Being temperate, practicing self-control.
Yes.
We are responsible for the way we respond to temptation. We're responsible for the way that we respond to challenging situations. We're in control of ourselves. And one of the things that I've learned, I've been doing lessons from 2 Peter chapter 1, and in adding to your faith, virtue, knowledge, self-control, is these are things we do. We have to work on this. And I don't believe a man has to be in perfect control of himself in every situation to be an elder. But I do believe he has to be working on that. And if he's one that just is out of control, if he has, problem controlling himself, he won't be able to work with other people.
Hey, Roger.
Yes, sir.
I guess in line with what you're saying, some of the qualifications may bleed over into others. For example, I was just thinking as you were talking a minute ago, exercising self-control. One of the qualifications is an elder is not to be soon angry. And that would have to do with exercising control over your emotions.
Yes.
And sometimes guys are not. I knew a man that actually did not exercise self-control and got himself in a situation with some members in the congregation. He tried to take some things on by himself, and as a result of that, he ended up having to step out of the eldership. And so I don't think that, as you said a minute ago, a man is nobody's perfect. The only perfect person I know of was the Lord. But to exercise self-control when it comes to our emotions, because Roger, when you're an elder, when you're an elder in the Lord's church, you're going to be dealing with people, and people have the ability to push your buttons sometimes, and you've got to know how to maintain that control. Now, I agree. It carries with it the idea of being in control in terms of eating, drinking, finances, a lot of different things. But being in control at all times, trying to keep your spirit or that inner man governed, is important.
Paul lists those, being temperate, being under self-control, separately. And I see that it's like self-control in all things. You're not tempted to waste your money. You're a good manager. I think that's part of managing your house. You're not tempted to overeat, and a lot of people do. And you're certainly not tempted. Let's say a man had a past where he was not under self-control. Maybe he had in the past been a drinker. Maybe he'd been a thief. But that, you've got to work as a new Christian, and that's why you can't be a novice. You've had time to work on some of these things that you need to bring under control. and the church should know, well, no, he doesn't steal, he doesn't lie, he doesn't, he has his life under control. I believe the temperate here is the whole man, where the other one of not being soon angry is a specific area. But those are good points. And then you got sober-minded. He's serious. Does that mean that an elder can never tell a joke or laugh at a joke? No. But if he's silly all the time, then he's not serious-minded. And you wonder how seriously he would take his role. And it's not saying that you can't have fun, but how seriously do you take this role? And is he the kind of person that when you need to sit down and talk to him, he knows how to get on a serious conversation level? He has a serious mindset. He's serious about serving God, taking care of God's people. He's serious, sober-minded about his role as a shepherd.
Sir.
This, like it's noted on the lesson here, sober-minded, being a shepherd or an overseer over the house of God is serious business.
Yes, sir. Normally I thought that when it speaks about soberness, it was all related with the fact that the elder should be clear-minded, as in not giving himself to wine, being drunk. That's how I thought it used, what I thought it used to me.
Well, that's certainly part of it. It is. And have you ever known people in school, Brother Solon, who just don't take their schoolwork seriously?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think that's more the idea of what we're talking about here, because Paul makes the point about not being given to wine and as a separate requirement or qualification.
Okay, sir.
So it's like there are some men who have in the past what we would consider be good men. They've been asked to be elders, and they say, I really need to think long and hard about this. I need to pray about this. Just give me some time. I do not want to rush into it. I believe that man's sober-minded. He's serious about it. He knows it's a serious position, and he knows that, when you read 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter introduces himself as a fellow elder, and he writes to other elders.
Yes, sir.
Then he talks about the chief shepherd. So let's move this. The chief shepherd is Jesus. He's up here, and God's shepherds, they're right there. That's a serious place to be. What do you say about that, Mike?
I think that's right. I think that there are, there are times to play and there are times to be serious, and I agree that it would encompass the idea of being one who abstains from alcoholic beverages, because when a person is inebriated, many times they act foolish and they lack self-control. But to be serious about the work, and I mean, this is the highest office in the Lord's church, is to serve as an elder. And I've known people that, they always joke around, they're never serious. And so to simply understand that the work is a very serious role. So it's something that you need to be clear-headed, and you need to be sober-minded, and realize that what you're doing impacts the souls of people for eternity.
That's right. Let's talk about being orderly here on page 8, being orderly. Number 7. An elder should be well directed, but he's a man who he's fairly organized. And I have to tell you something. When I worked in a secular job, I didn't have to be all that organized. I mean, I had a truck. I used to install burglar alarms, and that truck was organized. But as far as my life at home was, I just kind of haphazard. And I finally, when I got a little older and I got married, I had to get serious about my life being orderly, that I'm responsible for this woman I've married. I'm responsible for our finances. I'm responsible for how I use my time with her and with the children. And I'm responsible for taking care of my oversight in the home. And you got to be, you got to plan things. And when the eldership comes together, talking about being orderly, an elder needs to know how to observe and do certain things in an orderly fashion, and know how to put things together. And if they're looking at an evangelistic project, or if they're trying to develop new deacons or work, whatever they're working on. But
Hey,
there's
Roger,
a system here.
yeah.
Yes.
Don't you think that when it comes to being orderly in the Lord's church, and really that begins within the eldership because they set the tone. But the three keys I think that would fall under this, number one, is organization. You got to be organized. You talked about planning a minute ago. So there has to be organization, and then there needs to be communication. You got to be able to communicate effectively what your strategy is or what your plans are, and then to be transparent and to so that everybody's on the same page, and that requires being orderly.
We did a lesson some weeks back on how to have a highly effective church meeting. If you study that lesson and that material, and I've studied it a lot too, and I've been thinking hard about it, that's learning to be organized, learning to be functional, and to be orderly. It's like, your work in the church. You're not trying to do everything. You're trying to do the work of a shepherd. And I think all this goes together, but I like the idea here about planning, looking to the future. What does the eldership want to do for the future of this church? And what do I want to contribute to it? And do I want to be a part of making this happen? And I'm involved. These are qualifications that deserve a lot of serious thought. And I don't think you can narrow it down to like 4 sentences here. But to be, there are some churches, they're just haphazard in everything they do. An eldership can't be that way. They have to be, I like the word Mike used, is organized. They have to plan. They have to know what to plan, how to plan, what's important in the church, and what their roles are. Anything else on that, Mike?
No, I think I would just say, amen. I think that's just a very important thing to consider.
I talked to the students some time ago about having something to use to keep up with your work. This is my agenda. And I get it out and I write things down. And the men had a meeting at 8L on Sunday, and we set a date for our next meeting, and I've written that down. I know when it's going to be, so I can be there and I can be prepared for it. And if I have been assigned a task in that meeting, or I took on a task, something I'm going to do, I need to organize my life so I can get that done. And it's a serious response. It kind of goes back with being, sober minded and orderly. Being orderly, they go hand in hand. Good churches are run by well-organized people. Strong congregations are run by well-organized people. If a congregation's dragging its feet, so is the leadership.
And Roger, don't you think, in the business world, the corporate world, you talked about when you were working in the business world, successful businesses, they don't operate shooting from the hip, but rather they have a very strategic plan of operation. And the Lord's church, it's God's business. And I think sometimes what holds congregations back is we tend to to lead by shooting from the hip. Just, we just haphazardly make decisions and plan. And if that's the case, it's going to be hard to move forward in a positive way in the church.
That's right. Let's use an example here. So let's say the elders have a meeting, or the men of the church have a meeting. And so Brother Roger says, I was talking with a couple of men the other day about something we need to look at. And they said, yep, we need to look into that. But nobody took responsibility for, okay, I'll do that. So is that going to get done? More than likely it won't. So a part of being orderly is being organized as an eldership. And so we'll say if I'm an elder and Mike's an elder, so Mike says, well, I'll look into that and I'll report back to the eldership. So that's being orderly. It's being organized and being responsible. And typically it has to do with somebody's soul. Now I want to throw this in here for any of the preacher students who are listening, Brother Solon or whoever. I want you men to look at these qualifications and excluding, let's say you're not married and you don't have any children, but you can still look at these qualifications, whether you ever become an elder or not, and try to be these things. And be thinking now, you're not married. Think about how you're going to run your house when you get married. I know there are going to be a lot of surprises no matter how you plan it, but be thinking about it and think about, are you sober minded? Are you serious? Are you temperate? That is, do you practice self-control? Are you orderly? Are you organized? Or are you always late, always behind? And just think about these qualifications. I had an elder some years ago teaching this class in a congregation where I was, and he said, you don't have to be an elder to put these principles to work in your life. And I thought he made a good point.
And Roger, along those same lines, when it comes to preaching the gospel and planning your lessons, I mean, if you don't have a plan, if you haven't made preparation to present the gospel, then the old saying, aim at nothing, you hit nothing. If you just get up and wing it as a gospel preacher, the lesson's not going to be very effective. You've got to have a game plan.
Now, that's right. Yeah. If you don't have a game plan, you won't go anywhere. And you got to plan for things. Sometimes you may have something in the back of your mind, some little something that needs to be done. So, well, I'll get around to it one of these days and it's not real critical. But typically the things that elders deal with, there's no such thing as a non-critical issue for them that has to do with the work of the church. It's all important. Now, thinking about these things, let's say a man, he's not the most organized, but I want you to think about this, Brother Solon. You be this man, even if you never become an elder. Start working with the young men and help them become these kinds of people. So one day when they're old enough and they get married and they have children, they're already prepared in so many ways.
Yes.
I don't think a man has to be so perfect in his organization, but he has to be somewhat organized. He has to be somewhat organized, or at least willing to work on being that way. Because
Yes.
when you sit down, and I used to work on the mission staff in a congregation not far from here. And when we sat down and talked, we'd go down this list of things we had to do, and it was all important. And if I just kind of took, just a haphazard approach to it, I'd never get it done. If I did, I wouldn't do a good job with it. Now, talk about hospitality. I used to think that when I heard that meant an elder and his wife should have people in their home on a regular basis. And I don't know that that's really specifically that's kind of narrow, but a hospitable kind of personality. somebody who's courteous, they're friendly, they have a kind disposition. They are the kind of people who encourage others. An elder should be going to the hospitals and visiting his sheep. He shouldn't be sending somebody else. He should be looking out after his own people, even if the elders rotate on that. The elders should be willing to go and visit the homes of their shut-in sisters, their older, the widows and the older men, and kindly, to me, that's some hospitality, but also the kind of persona you have. How kind are you? Are you real harsh? You know, or do you have compassion for people? And do you care about the needy and the lost and lonely? Just think about being a shepherd, and let's say that a shepherd has 100 sheep like Jesus talked about. He cares about every one of those sheep. And if one of those sheep gets lost, he goes and looks for it. Or if one of those sheep gets hurt, you know, if a sheep falls on its back, it can't turn itself over. They can't. They have to have help. And to me, this is part of this gentleness and say, let's get you back on your feet. Let's see what we can do. And the way, and then let's say that an elder does have people in their home. Are the guests comfortable?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, sir.
You know, when you go to his home, are you glad that you went? Or you say, well, I'll be glad when I can leave here. You know, it's and if you think about it, if people come to my home, I'm glad they're here. I really am. And the way that we respond to people at home, the way we respond to them when they visit the church. One of the complaints I hear sometimes, and I'm not trying to be too excessively hard on elders, just something to think about. Some people say, well, you can't, they're not approachable. You just can't talk to them. They're just too stiff, and you know, you're not comfortable talking to them. If an elder is that way, he needs to work on himself. That doesn't mean he has to agree with everything that people bring to him, but if he's not approachable, people aren't going to come to him with anything, and they're going to go wanting. And it's just an overall picture of the man, and you know, like, and what's wrong with an elder, the eldership getting together when the whole church is sending cards to people? Well, make sure we sign these, you know, let's be involved, or the visitation. And I think the main thing is, can you talk to him? Do you feel good about talking to him? And even if it's a hard discussion, maybe it's about a marital issue, or maybe that is a situation where there's some firmness that needs to be there. I don't believe there should be one elder of this all the time, but the way we respond to people can determine the way they respond to God. And so I think about hospitality, people being comfortable come and talk to you, and they're glad they were around you.
And I think maybe if I could just interject for a second, whenever I think about that qualification, hospitality, what comes to my mind is he is a people person. There are some people that they don't like people, and they don't want to be around people. And an elder has to be a people person. And what Roger said about approachable, people are not going to share their hurts and their needs and their wants with somebody they don't know. And, you know, if you look at Jesus, when he talked about how he was the good shepherd, one of the things he emphasized, the shepherd knows the sheep. And the only way you can know the sheep is to be around them and to be people oriented. And I think that one of the problems that we have in America when it comes to eldership, we view the eldership as a decision-making board. and we've got an office. I'm not sure an eldership needs an office because they tend to hibernate there. What they need, their office is among the people. And the whole job is people oriented. And so I think that's a very important qualification.
Well, when you think about trying to restore people, if they're not comfortable with you, they don't want you coming to talk to them. Now, some people don't anyway because they know they're in the wrong, and the preacher calls, so I know why he's calling, and they're probably in the wrong or they wouldn't feel that way. But the way we deal with people, and I know the perfect example of this is watch how Jesus dealt with people. The way he responded when the woman was taken in adultery in John chapter 8, the way he interacted with the woman at the well in John chapter 4, and Zacchaeus is looking for him, and Jesus says, you know what, I'm going home with you today. That endears people. And I'm talking to us as preachers too, and let's just say somebody says, well, I'm just having a hard time, and my response is, well, that's just too bad. Well, that's not going to make somebody feel good. So, I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I really am. Why don't we pray about that? That's what an elder needs to do. And I'll tell you what, people go away feeling encouraged, feeling strengthened, and a bond has been formed. And we preachers need to be that way too, with people, because they listen to us every week. If they don't like us, they're probably just listening because they have to go to church. I don't want it to be that way with me. And so I think about these things for myself as well. Am I kind? Do I have compassion? Am I interested in the lonely? And then how about the elder being that way? Let's take a break, and you might want to stop the recording before we get to the top of page 9 on Apt to Teach. Let's say I got different time on these clocks. I got 3:26. How about we come back in about 15 minutes? 5:55, 15 minutes.
Good enough.